If one day you step into a strange land with bruises that have not yet healed, do you dare believe that that place will give you peace? In 1,884 inches, the dusty Iron Willow Prairie, a male bride named Amelia Trent landed on the present's frontier. With little more than an old duffel bag and a heart torn by her past, Amelia thought her life would be filled with nothing but fear. But what stopped the town were the bruises on her face. Who did it? And why would a vulnerable woman choose to come to a remote place like Ellison Ridge? As Amelia struggled to her feet, a horseman nearly pounced on her. A man pulled her out of harm's way. Thatcher Hale, the owner of Ellison Ridge, a man of few words but with the sorrow in his eyes that only those who have lost can possess. He looked into Amelia's wounded face and said the words that would change the fate of two people. Whatever wounds brought you here, they will be your last. If it were you standing in that moment, one side is the dark past, the other side is the promise from a stranger, what would you choose, trust or turn away? Join me as we embark on a healing journey through the Wild West where small kindnesses can change lives. If you love humane stories, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can start this emotional journey together. In 1884, the border town of Hollow Creek, Colorado Territory, was just a small strip of land wedged between two pale mountainsides. That morning, a cold, late winter wind blew along the main road, stirring up layers of fine dust. The townspeople, accustomed to the wind, the soil, and a quiet life, had not yet noticed the horse-drawn carriage that had just stopped in front of the post office, until a young girl stepped down. She was slightly unsteady, as if she had gone days without a full night's sleep. Amelia Trent, only 22, wore a frayed flannel coat and clutched a dark leather satchel. Her face was thin and pale, but what made people stop to look was not the fatigue but the faint purple bruises that still marked her cheeks running down to her ears. In that moment, Hollow Creek seemed to hold its breath. No one said it out loud, but a silent question spread in everyone's eyes. Who had caused a girl to have such a face, and why had she come to a remote place like Hollow Creek? Amelia ducked her head, avoiding eye contact. She wasn't used to being stared at for long, couldn't trust anyone to look at her without hurting her. Her hand tightened around the bag, which contained only a few light clothes, a torn Bible, and a proposal. A letter from a man she'd never met. A last resort when life had nowhere to turn. She had not gone a few steps down the road when a horse's hooves thundered. A careless rider was riding too fast, not having time to rein in his horse when he saw someone standing in the middle of the road. In another second, the horse's hooves would have brushed straight at the slender girl, but someone's strong arm suddenly pulled her aside. Amelia nearly fell against the wooden wall, her breath caught. When she looked up, a strange man's bright brown eyes were looking at her, worried and cautious. His face was tanned, his posture was strong like a working man, but what frightened Amelia was his closeness. Any man who came near her brought back memories she did not dare to remember. She immediately took a step back. The man didn't try to move any further. He just tilted his head slightly, his voice low but warm, as if he was used to talking to easily startled people. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you." "Are you okay?" Before Amelia could reply, his gaze froze. He looked straight at the bruises on her face, not with scrutiny or pity, but with a deeper, darker emotion, as if familiar with this kind of pain. A short silence fell between the two, and then he asked in a voice not loud but enough to make people feel uneasy, "Who did this to you?" The question hit the pain Amelia had been trying to bury for so long. It wasn't loud, but it made her heart clench. Part of her wanted to run, a reflex ingrained over the years. The other part just stood still, too tired to hide it. In that moment, it seemed as if all of Hollow Creek stopped waiting for the young girl's answer. But Amelia said nothing. She just clutched the bag tightly, as if it were the only shoulder she had left in this world. The man understood. He did not ask further questions, did not comment. He simply looked at her again slowly, as if considering something important. The wind blew harder, whipping Amelia's thin coat. She shivered slightly. It seemed that at that moment the man had the answer to his thoughts. He said in a firm but not pressured voice, "You don't need to explain right now." Then he stepped back, creating a safe distance, a small gesture that made Amelia's heart flutter a little less. She wasn't used to such measured kindness. Kindness without demands. A group of people standing nearby began to whisper, not out of malice but because of the unexpected event. The man turned to look at them. His gaze was enough for them to understand and disperse, leaving the girl alone. And strangely enough, no one dared to object. The silence made Amelia blurt out, though her voice was so shaky she wasn't sure she'd said it herself. "Why are you helping me?" The man smiled, a slight, very faint smile, as if just passing the corner of his lips. "At Hollow Creek, we don't leave anyone alone in the middle of the road, in that condition." It was a simple sentence, but to Amelia it made her heart ache in a different way. Not pain, but as if something was melting away. He held out his hand, not touching her, just offering it as an invitation. "My name is Ward Ellison. I know the person you came to see." Amelia looked up, her dark brown eyes dilated with surprise and concern. "Do you know who wrote that letter?" Ward nodded, his eyes softening. "Yes, and I believe he will not let you be afraid again." Amelia wanted to ask many questions, but her throat was dry. She just clenched the letter in her pocket, suddenly feeling heavier than ever. Ward then took another step back, giving her space to decide. Perhaps it was that quiet respect that made Amelia nod, however slowly. Ward didn't touch her, didn't help her, just walked beside her, keeping enough distance so she wouldn't feel threatened. They walked on the dusty main road, the pale sunlight filtering through the old wooden houses, the sound of hammering, the distant neighing of horses, the sound of wind through the cracks in the planks, all blended into a silence that could easily be mistaken for peace. But Amelia's heart was another land, wild, wavering, not easy to cross. Ward said nothing more, only occasionally glancing at her with eyes like someone who had seen many people hurt, and understood that silence was also a form of protection. As they passed the town sign, Amelia felt a feeling in the pit of her stomach she couldn't quite name: fear, hope. As if this could be the end, or just another turn in the life she'd been forced to run for years. Ward stopped at a fork in the road. He turned to her, his voice lower and softer this time. "The place you are going to is not far from here. But before we continue," he paused, letting his words sink in with the wariness in her eyes, "I think you should know that man is not like the ones who hurt you." Amelia paused. The words were gentle, but they hit her where she was most vulnerable. She looked at the road ahead, the road that led to the farm where the letter writer was waiting, and for a moment the wind was no longer so bitter that it made her shiver as before. And right at that crossroads where the wind carries the cold of the western valley, Amelia still cannot know that the person waiting for her at the end of the road will open a completely new chapter, where the past is no longer a calm, binding rope but only a blurred mark to move forward. The road to Ellison Ridge Ranch stretched out in the late afternoon light like a strip of silver across the changing Colorado prairie. Ward walked beside her, maintaining the calm silence of someone who knew Amelia's footsteps were not just on the ground but also on her own heart. Ward stopped at the large wooden gate. He pointed to the amber-colored cabin in the middle of the ranch, much smaller than the large ranches to the south, but neat and peaceful, smoke rising in thin columns from its kitchen stove. "He's in there," Ward said, his voice low as if afraid to make her more nervous. Amelia clutched her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had never met the man who had written the proposal. She didn't know what to hope for, kindness or just another disappointment like the ones she'd left behind. Ward noticed it. He opened the gate and slowed down. "His name is Thatcher Hale." "How old are you?" Amelia asked softly. 35. A mature age enough to understand what loss is and what preservation is. Ward stopped in front of the house and knocked lightly. Before long, the wooden door opened, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark hair streaked with gray, a sign of years gone by. His eyes first met Ward, then slowly moved to Amelia, and stopped, not because of surprise at meeting his mail-order bride, not because of curiosity about the girl standing at his doorstep, but because of the bruises that had turned the color of her cheekbones. Amelia lowered her head reflexively, as if afraid of being seen. But the man Thatcher didn't look at her with the pity or disdain she was used to. He looked as if someone had been hit in a place deep within his own memory. Ward spoke first. "I found her at the bus station. A horseman almost hit her." Thatcher didn't answer. His eyes, a cold steel gray with a warm glow at the bottom, remained fixed on Amelia's cheek. He took a step forward, but very slowly, so as not to startle her. When he was close enough to see the old bruises that had not yet faded, his lips pressed together. Then, with a reserve rare in a Western man, Thatcher raised his hand, pausing in midair as if waiting for permission. Amelia said nothing, didn't nod, didn't shake, just stood there, too scared to back away, too tired to run. Thatcher understood it was the silence of someone so wounded that every reflex was trapped in fear. He lowered his hand a fraction, then touched her chin very lightly, lifting it no more than an inch. At that moment the wind seemed to stop in the middle of the step. His voice was low, not high, but enough to touch deep into the silent void in her heart. Whatever bruises brought you here, they will be the last you will ever have. A promise not of pity, not of a man who feels possessive, but of a man who has experienced, who has witnessed human suffering, and who knows that sometimes a timely word can save a lost soul. But as soon as his fingers touched that thin skin, Amelia immediately stepped back, her eyes wide with fear. The instinct to flee arose like a shadow that could not be separated from her life. Thatcher understood immediately. He lowered his hand immediately, taking 2 small steps back, creating a safe space like Ward had done before. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice lower. "I didn't mean to scare you." Ward stood beside her, nodding slightly, as if confirming that Amelia could trust Thatcher. The young woman looked at the 2 men standing before her, one who had brought her home from the bus station, the other who was trying to keep his hands from shaking with anger at her old injuries. And for the first time in months, Amelia did not feel threatened by the 2 men around her. A strange feeling, gentle yet deep, touched her like the warmth of a kitchen fire after a long, cold day. Thatcher opened the door wider. "Would you like to come in?" "Only if you want." Amelia hesitated. She was not used to making choices. She had never had such an opportunity in her life. But finally, with a small breath, she stepped in. Not because she believed right away, but because she wanted to believe that somewhere in this vast land there was a place where fear no longer existed. The house inside was warm and bright. Not luxurious, but neat, with every object in its place, the sign of a man who lived alone but with principles. On the wooden table lay an open prairie diary and a pair of old riding gloves. Amelia stood near the fire, listening to the crackling of the wood. Ward put down her bag, then gently left after looking at Thatcher with a meaningful look. "Be careful, she is fragile." When the door closed, the 2 of them were alone in the quiet house. Thatcher stood a few steps away from her, not coming closer but not leaving either, his presence like the shadow of a tree standing firm against a strong wind. He spoke, "First, I don't know your past, and I won't ask until you want to tell me." Amelia swallowed the lump in her throat. Everyone wanted to know. Everyone asked. Only this man didn't ask. Thatcher continued, her eyes remaining unusually calm. "But there's one thing I want to make clear right from the start. Here at Ellison Ridge, no one is allowed to touch you if you don't want them to." A simple sentence, but to Amelia it was as important as an oath. She asked softly, "Why? Are you nice to me?" Thatcher looked into the fire for a long moment before replying, "Because I have seen people who have not been treated well, and I promised myself, if I met anyone who needed protection, I would do the right thing." His voice didn't tremble, but there was something heavy about it, like a memory, like an old shadow from a battlefield Amelia didn't know. A long silence followed that statement, making the room seem warmer. Then Amelia, as if led by that gentleness, nodded slightly, not saying yes to anything big, just saying yes to being in the moment. Thatcher saw it. He let out a sigh of relief, as if he had been relieved of some invisible burden that he had not even noticed he was carrying. He walked to the table and poured her a cup of warm water. No pressure, no insistence, just put it on the small table near her and said, "You don't have to make any decisions today. In the West, we learn to give someone time to recover." Amelia stared at the glass of water for a long moment. Then, for the first time since arriving on Hollow Creek, she found herself taking a deep breath. And as Amelia's hand gently lifted the warm cup to her lips, she had no idea that the following days would bring a kind of peace she had never known. A quiet, unruffled, unforced peace. A peace that could only be born from true kindness. The first morning at Ellison Ridge opened in the vibrant, soft golden light of the Colorado prairie. When Amelia woke, the wind outside the window was steady, like the breath of a land that had seen too many lives pass through it. The room that Thatcher had prepared for her the night before was small but neat, the comforter smelling of sunshine without any trace of domination or imposition. For a long time Amelia just sat on the edge of the bed, her feet on the hand-woven rug, listening to the unfamiliar silence. For years she had only woken with fear. Fear of the sound of a door opening. Fear of someone breathing heavily behind her. Fear of the new day always being the same as the last. Yet here this morning there was only light resting on her skinny hands and a question creeping into her heart. Could she really be safe? There was a light knock on the door, not urgent, not intrusive. Amelia Thatcher's voice came from outside, low and distant. "Ward has come to take us to Dr. Everett's." Amelia jumped slightly, not used to someone announcing their every move. She opened the door a crack, and Thatcher took a step back as a quickly formed habit of respect. "Do I need to see a doctor?" she asked, her voice still trembling slightly. Thatcher did not look her directly in the face when he answered, as if afraid that his eyes would pressure her. "I just wanted to make sure you weren't seriously hurt. Mr. Everett is the most trustworthy man in this area." Amelia bowed her head, partly out of shame and partly because she knew the bruises on her face weren't everything. But she had no strength left to protest. She had come to this place to start over, and starting over meant facing what her body carried. Ward waited for them on the porch, his hand resting lightly on the saddle. He smiled when Amelia emerged, the smile of someone who knew that her mere daring to walk through the door this morning was a victory in itself. The three of them got into the carriage. It wasn't a long walk from Ellison Ridge to the small infirmary at the end of town, but long enough for Amelia to feel the meaningful silence between them. They didn't press her with questions, didn't try to make her talk more. They just walked with her like two guides helping a weary soul find a place to rest. The wooden house, where Dr. Edmund Everett lived and worked, was on the edge of town, where the wind carried the scent of young pines and hay from the valley. He was in his 60s. His hair as white as the evening clouds. His hands, though mottled with age, still steady. He had been an army physician in the war that the whole area still spoke of hoarsely. As Amelia entered, Mr. Everett's eyes rested on her face, not with curiosity but with the look of one who has seen too much human pain to judge anything anymore. "So young," he whispered, not to anyone but with heavy regret. Thatcher stood behind, saying softly, "I want you to take a look at her. If you can." "I understand." The doctor nodded. In the dimly lit examination room, Dr. Everett carefully examined the bruises on his cheeks, his arms, and the faint purple marks on his shoulders. He didn't ask about their origins, only occasionally letting out a very small sigh, the kind of sigh only those who have treated soldiers in combat have, a wordless sympathy deep and rare. Amelia sat still, but her hands were clenched. She was used to rough touches, to power, to possessiveness. But the doctor's hands were healing hands, not demanding hands. As he bandaged a small wound near her wrist, he paused for a moment, then said in a deep, warm voice with a hint of an elderly man's tremor, "Pain leaves its marks, daughter, but kindness can erase them." The words made Amelia close her eyes, not to cry because she couldn't cry yet. But something in her chest that had been strangled for so long suddenly opened like a small vein, finding a way to flow. Thatcher heard, and stood straighter, as if Mr. Everett had just spoken for him what he had been holding in his heart since the first moment he had seen her. After the doctor finished bandaging, Thatcher left the room to pay. Mr. Everett took the opportunity to lean over and whisper to Amelia, "Mr. Thatcher is a kind man. But being kind does not mean being in a hurry. You have the right to slow down." She nodded slightly, not yet knowing whether she deserved such kindness or not. It was late afternoon when they left the doctor's house. The honeyed light of late afternoon poured down on Hollow Creek's main street, making everything seem less harsh. Thatcher stopped in front of the town's smallest grocery store. "I need to buy some things," he said. "If you want to come in, that's fine. If you want to wait outside with Ward, that's fine too." No one had ever asked Amelia what she wanted before. The question so embarrassed her that she could only reply, "I want to come in." In the shop, Thatcher did not ask her what she wanted, but bought the things any woman who had just traveled a long distance would need: a thicker coat, a woolen scarf, small gloves, soft bread, herbal tea, ointment for bruises. He placed each item on the counter with the care of someone who did not want to burden anyone. The only thing he didn't do was touch her, and it was that not touching that made Amelia feel more respected than any words. On the way back to Ellison Ridge, Amelia looked at her hands in her lap, her new gloves soft as breath. She whispered, as if talking to herself, "Not everyone who is nice to you is hiding something." Thatcher heard but did not reply. He only smiled slightly. His eyes turned to the road ahead, where the sunset was stretching into a coppery red. They returned to the farmhouse with the fire lit the light in the small house, making Amelia feel warm in a way she had never dared to hope. Dinner was simple: potato soup, toast, and hot tea. But Amelia had never felt so safe. No one shouted, no one made demands, no one forced her to talk. Just a man quietly ladling more soup for her, then placing a wooden spoon close to her hand, not too close to scare her, not too far away to feel abandoned. And in that simplicity she clearly felt what wordless kindness was. And that night, as Amelia fell asleep in Ellison Ridge's small room with the scent of herbal tea still lingering in her hands, she couldn't quite name the feeling growing inside her. It wasn't happiness, it was too early for that. It was just like the first warmth after a long winter, a fragile sense that life might be less cruel. The next morning, Thatcher took Amelia for a walk across the farm. Not to show off, just to let her know where she stood in this vast landscape. Ellison Ridge sat in the middle of Iron Willow Valley, a valley that stretched like a soft ribbon at the foot of the silvery mountains in the distance. The early morning sunlight fell on the low, dewy grasses, creating tiny points of light like 1,000 glass beads. Amelia walked slowly, each step cautiously, as if the soft ground beneath her feet might change its mind at any moment. Thatcher walked beside her, but at a distance, maintaining the same deference Amelia had grown accustomed to, though sometimes it made her nervous in other ways. He pointed toward the largest cabin. "This will be your temporary home," Thatcher said, his voice slow and clear. "Only temporarily, until you decide what you want." Amelia looked at him, her eyes filled with fear and surprise. "You don't consider this a bondage?" Thatcher shook his head, as light as a breeze blowing through his shirt. "I don't want marriage to be a burden. It only happens when you choose it." The words fell on Amelia like a drop of water softening dry soil. Over the years, everything in her life had been decided for her, where she lived, what she did, even her right to remain silent. And now, she had a choice. A simple privilege, but it made her choke. The house Thatcher ushered her into was meticulously maintained. The living room had a stone fireplace, a long wooden table polished with age, and a neatly folded tablecloth. Nothing was luxurious, but everything was clean and orderly, as if its owner had always tried to keep his world steady through the storms that had passed. Amelia touched the windowsill, lightly, feeling the smoothness of the wood. She had never been anywhere that made her feel unthreatening. Thatcher stood in the doorway, not going too far in. "If you need anything else, I can buy it in town." Amelia shook her head. She wasn't used to people worrying about her. In truth, she was not yet used to herself. This new world was so peaceful that it confused her, like someone stepping from darkness into sunlight and not knowing how to open her eyes. Thatcher turned to go out when a distant explosion suddenly echoed through the quiet space of the step. Boom! Amelia jerked. Her whole body tightened, her eyes widened, and her breathing quickened. She backed away from the wall, raising her arms as if to cover her head, an old reflex so ingrained it was beyond her control. Thatcher turned back at once. His eyes were filled with an indescribable emotion, pain mixed with anger at the memories that had frightened her like this. He didn't touch her. He only took a half step forward, standing between her and the window, his body a silent shield. "It's all right," he said softly, lowering his voice so as not to alarm her further. "It was just a signal shot. The cowboys are rounding up the cattle in the field." Amelia stood still for a long time. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Only when she realized there was no one rushing towards her, no shouting, no danger, did she take a deeper breath. Thatcher continued to stand still, not turning around, as if he knew she could only recover if she was not watched too closely. As the gunshots faded, Amelia slowly let go, her eyes stinging but not shedding a tear. She said softly, as if confessing, I'm not used to loud sounds." Thatcher nodded, still with quiet patience. "I know. Your fear will not be judged here." That made Amelia's shoulders sag, as if an invisible string had been loosened around her chest. No one had ever told her that fear was acceptable. Thatcher turned away from the window but kept his distance. "I will teach them to reduce firing near the house," he said. "Your peace is more important." Amelia quickly shook her head. "You don't need to do that. I will get used to it." Thatcher looked at her for a long time, his eyes filled with something like respect, like sympathy. "You don't need to be strong today." That statement, more than anything else, made Amelia's chest tighten. For so long she had been forced to be strong. Today, for the first time, she was allowed to be weak. That afternoon, Thatcher led her out onto the back porch where the Iron Willow Valley opened out into the palm of her hand. In the distance, cattle moved in long lines. The afternoon sun bathed the meadows in pale honey. "I want you to see," Thatcher said, "that this place is big enough for you to have your own space." Amelia stood by the wooden railing. The wind blew through her hair as gently as someone's hand soothing a weary soul. She whispered, I have never had a place like home. Thatcher did not answer immediately. He stood on the lower step, not level with her so as not to put pressure on her. Finally he said, "Then you can start from here. Not to become my wife, just to become yourself." Amelia turned to look at him. Her eyes for the first time held more than just fear. There was a small, tiny glimmer of hope. As dusk fell over the valley, the orange and purple hues blended together like an unsigned painting. Amelia didn't know where life would take her, didn't know if she had the strength to overcome her old wounds. But for the first time she found herself not alone. And ever since the evening sun had settled over Iron Willow Valley, Amelia had learned that peace didn't come all at once, but in small pieces like light filtering through old wood. She didn't yet call Ellison Ridge home, but she was beginning to stop dreading new mornings. The following days at the farm passed slowly, as if time here did not run but only walked slowly. Amelia began to get used to the early morning crowing of roosters, the sound of wind sweeping through the pine trees, and the steady hooves of horses from the distant barns. But what made her feel like she belonged was not the scenery, it was the people who lived here. One of the first people she met was Ruth Mendoza, the Mexican housekeeper who had been with the ranch for nearly 20 years. Ruth had a round face, bright brown eyes, and a smile as soft as a towel hung out on the porch. The first time she saw Amelia standing awkwardly, with her hands unsure of where to put them, Ruth stepped forward and placed her hand lightly on her elbow. A very small touch, but enough to convey a sense of security. "You don't have to be afraid. Everyone here comes from a place that has caused them pain." Amelia didn't know what to say, but that sentence, like a warm stone placed on a cold palm, made her shiver a little and then gradually calm down. Ruth taught Amelia how to knead tortillas, how to stew beans with oregano, how to fold a tablecloth without wrinkles. The tasks were small and repetitive, but the repetition helped Amelia settle her mind. She found herself no longer drifting, at least not during the hours she spent in the kitchen with Ruth. In addition to Ruth, Amelia also met Eli Carter, a 14-year-old orphan who Thatcher had taken in as a worker. Eli was quiet and thin, but his eyes were bright and alert, like a field bird. At first he avoided Amelia, not because he was shy, but because he was afraid of startling her. But then one afternoon, as Amelia sat on the steps peeling beans, Eli walked over and placed a bouquet of pale purple wildflowers beside her. "You seem to like flowers," he whispered. "How did you know?" Amelia asked in surprise. Eli shrugged. "I see your face brighten when you look at the flower bushes at the edge of the field." It was the first time in years that Amelia laughed, a small laugh, but enough that the wind seemed to stop to listen. The ranch's longtime cowboys, Bo and Harlan Reeves, surprised Amelia in other ways. They didn't talk much, but they always smiled and greeted her when they passed the porch. Bo, the older brother, was as calm as an oak tree. Harlan, the younger, was jovial and a horse-talker. Both treated Amelia with the gentleness that only seasoned prairie veterans possess, quiet, reserved, but protective. One afternoon, when she accidentally dropped her bucket of water, Harlan simply cupped his hands, tipped his hat, and said, "It's okay, Miss Amelia. Everyone here has dropped something." The sentence seemed simple, but in Amelia's heart it resonated deeply and permeated. That's right. Everyone has lost a part of themselves. In the evenings, when her work was done, Amelia would sit in the small living room. Thatcher would sometimes come in carrying the scent of wind and horses from the distant fields. He never sat too close, choosing a chair by the window where the oil lamplight cast a soft golden glow on his face. One evening, Amelia suddenly asked, "Why did you choose to live in such a remote place?" Thatcher was silent for a moment, as if listening to the unspoken words in that question. "I've been in noisy places," he replied slowly, "where there was more gunfire than human voices. I lost my brother there." Amelia looked up. Thatcher was still staring out the window as if the memory did not belong in this room. "We served in the same unit. One time we were in a fight. I didn't have time to pull him to safety." He paused, not because he was choking, but because there were too many painful stories to tell. "I chose to come back here. I thought if I could create a peaceful place, maybe I would find the part of me that I had lost." Amelia was silent. Then, as if guided by an invisible string, she said, "I also lost myself, many times." Thatcher looked at her at those words, no pity, no shock, just the deep empathy of one who knows pain not to judge but to understand. They said nothing more. They just sat there in a long silence that didn't make Amelia uncomfortable. In Hollow Creek, silence was a form of language, a kind of quiet kindness. But peace cannot erase deep-seated fear. One night while Ruth was asleep, the distant pines a black silhouette against the purple sky, Amelia was suddenly startled. A nightmare swept through her like a cold wind, tearing at her flesh, screams, falling objects, someone's hand pulling her hair. She jumped up, screaming a small but sharp sound like a knife. The oil lamp in the corridor suddenly turned on, but the door of the room did not open. Thatcher only knocked twice very lightly. "Amelia," she gasped, her hands clutching her chest. I'm fine." Her voice was not fine at all. Thatcher did not open the door, did not enter, did not offer. Just ask one question in a low and confident voice. "Do you want me to sit outside the door with you?" An open-ended question, not forced, not imposing, is enough to let the listener know they don't have to face their fear alone. Amelia looked at the door. The light from under the crack showed the shadow of Thatcher's boots placed neatly. She didn't understand why her chest felt warm. "Yes," she whispered. Thatcher sat down, her back against the outside wall. She didn't say anything, didn't try to comfort him. She just sat there like a guardian of the fragile sleep of a girl who had lived her whole life in fear. Gradually, Amelia's breathing evened out. As she laid her head back on the pillow, she knew this. Sometimes kindness is not about walking into someone's life. It's about standing outside, being there when they need you. And from the night, Thatcher sat silently outside the door, waiting for Amelia's breathing to stabilize. Something had changed. Not a confession, not a promise, but a very small kind of trust, as small as the first ray of dawn, but enough for a once-broken heart to dare to open once more. The morning after that night, Amelia walked down the porch steps like someone who had just come a long way without being seen. She no longer avoided people's eyes, though she was still reserved. Ruth smiled when she saw her. Eli bowed a little awkwardly, but respectfully. Bo and Harlan raised their hands to greet her from a distance, smiling more gently than usual. Thatcher stood near the well, his shirt sleeves rolled up, checking the well rope as he did every morning. When he saw Amelia, he gave a slight nod, a simple greeting, but to her it was a reminder that today was a new day and she wouldn't have to enter it alone. A week later, as Amelia slowly regained her composure, Thatcher offered to go with her to Cedar Grove Chapel in Hollow Creek. Not to get married, but to go over the details in case she ever wanted to. When he said that, Amelia was silent for a long time. Finally, she nodded slightly. Not because she was ready, but because she wanted to know what it felt like to face a future without fear. The Cedar Grove Church sat on a low knoll overlooking the Iron Willow Valley like a benevolent sentinel. Its pine walls were weathered, but a small bell hanging from the eaves still rang in the wind. Reverend Wallace, a kindly white-haired man, opened the door to greet them. He looked at Amelia with eyes that had seen more sad stories than a man deserved. "Girl, did you come because your heart told you to, or because of circumstances?" he asked in a soft but deep voice. Amelia took a hesitant breath. She looked at Thatcher, then down at her hands. "I need time." Reverend Wallace nodded as if that was what he had been expecting. Thatcher stood next to him and said clearly, without any hesitation, "She will have all the time she needs." After saying that, he took a half-step back as if to give Amelia some space. A quiet respect, but stronger than any promise. After a while of conversation, Reverend Wallace asked, "So, how long do you want to think?" Amelia looked up. There was fear in her eyes, but also a courage she didn't know she had. 2 weeks. Thatcher was still for a second, not with surprise, but with gratitude. He didn't laugh, just a flicker of warmth in the corners of his eyes. Reverend Wallace placed his hand on the Bible and said, "Time doesn't heal everything, but time shows us where we really want to go." Amelia listened, and for the first time in years she felt the statement was true of her own life. As they stepped out of Cedar Grove Chapel, a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine trees from the mountains. The dirt road that ran past the church was as peaceful as ever, until a figure stood at the bottom of the steps. Amelia stopped. Her face suddenly turned ashen. It was Ray Mercer, her stepfather's cousin, a man who had beaten her, yelled at her, and who had made her afraid of the dark for years. He recognized her immediately. His eyes widened, not in surprise, but because he saw his old prey suddenly appear in an unexpected place. "Amelia, so you ran all the way here." His voice was long, teasing, as if trying to make her shrink back. An old instinct made Amelia take a step back, her breath ragged, but a figure immediately stepped forward in front of her. Without thinking, without hesitation, Thatcher Hale stood between them. No muscle flexing, no gun pulling, no anger. Just stand there steady as a pine tree, seasoned and unflinching. Ray curled his lips. "Who are you to interfere in my family affairs?" Thatcher replied in a voice as low, deep, and solid as the Colorado soil beneath their feet. "From now on, she does not belong to a family that knows how to hurt her." Ray laughed mockingly. "What about you? Do you think you are better than anyone?" Thatcher's expression did not change. He just tilted his head, his eyes cold but not threatening. "The only thing I'm better at is that I know a man's limits. And I know clearly. She's no longer someone you can hurt." Then, as if to conclude, he said slowly, "She's not yours to hurt anymore. No roar. No charge. No fight." It was just a statement. But it made Ray take a half-step back, not because he was afraid of Thatcher, but because Western men knew when someone like Thatcher said the limit has been reached, it was best to stop. Ray cursed under his breath, turned away, and walked down the dirt slope without looking back. As he walked away, Amelia stood still, her hands shaking. Ray's presence was like an old knife slashing at a raw scar. Thatcher turned back but did not touch her. He just asked, "Are you okay?" Amelia tried to purse her lips, but a tear fell anyway, not because of Ray, but because for the first time in her life someone stood between her and her fear without using violence to prove it. She nodded slightly as if in thanks. Thatcher responded with silence, a protective silence. That afternoon, as the carriage drove them back to Ellison Ridge, Amelia sat by the window watching the trees drift by. She felt tired but not as hopeless as before, and when the night wind rose she suddenly understood courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is standing in the face of fear and choosing to take the next step. The 2 weeks ahead weren't a pressing deadline forced upon her by life. They were a journey she had chosen for herself, and that made her feel alive again. And from the moment Amelia said 2 weeks, Thatcher understood. It wasn't just a deadline she was giving him. It was also a time she was giving herself to believe again, to stand up straight, and to step into a new life that was no longer as shaky as before. The 2 weeks passed slowly, and with change. In the mornings, Amelia helped Ruth in the kitchen. In the afternoons, she followed Eli to the vegetable garden, listening to him tell stories about the newly hatched chicks. In the afternoons, Bo or Harlan sometimes showed her how to tell the weather by the color of the clouds. Little things, but they all made Amelia feel less alone. And then, just as Reverend Wallace had said one morning in late June, as the golden sunshine bathed the town of Hollow Creek, Ruth walked into the kitchen, placed a cup of tea in front of Amelia, and said in a voice that could not hide her joy, "Today we go to town to choose fabric to make a wedding dress." Amelia paused. Her hands rested on the table, motionless for a few seconds. The word wedding dress was something she had never dared to think about. All this time she had only tried to learn how to live, how to breathe, how not to tremble when hearing the strong wind. As for wedding dress, it sounded like something for other women, those who had never been hurt, those who had never had a past that scared them to the point of sleep. But Ruth placed her hand on the back of her hand, a light, gentle, tender touch. "No one said you had to get married today, Amelia. But we are. Because you deserve it. Worthy. Such a simple word, yet it touches deeper than anything else." The drive into town was long and sunny. Sitting in the carriage, Amelia saw Hollow Creek, its slanted wooden roofs, the small grocery store, Mr. Hank's blacksmith shop, the jingling bells of Mrs. Callie's pharmacy. The place was usually quiet, but today, for some reason, it felt as familiar as an open embrace. Ruth led her into the shop of Loretta Barnes, a woman who had made wedding dresses for 3 generations of women in Hollow Creek. Her hair was gray, her hands trembled slightly with age, but her eyes were still sharp. When Amelia entered, Mrs. Barnes looked at her for a long moment, not at the fading bruises, not at her confusion, but straight into the deep brown eyes that still held a trace of fear. And she laughed. "Are you here to measure for a wedding dress?" Amelia blushed. I just wanted to look at some fabrics. Whether it's good luck or bad luck, it all starts here." She pointed to her heart. The words made Amelia duck her head. Not out of shame, but out of fear that she might see the tears glistening in her eyes. All morning the women of the town took turns bringing out their favorite rolls of fabric. Cream, pale blue, ivory, each color had a story, a mother's wedding dress, a sister's, or a best friend's from her youth. They didn't ask Amelia about her past. They didn't pry. They just helped, just smiled, just gave advice as if she were someone they'd known for a long time. During the dress fitting, Mrs. Barnes kept pinning and chatting. "Thatcher Hale is a good man. For 10 years he has helped widows get through the winter, helped veterans find jobs, and even adopted Eli when he was a homeless boy. Amelia looked up. The things Thatcher did he never told, Ruth added proudly. He always works in silence. In the West, good people don't talk much. Amelia bit her lip lightly, feeling a strange warmth in her heart, a warmth slowly seeping into every corner inside. When Mrs. Barnes led Amelia into the mirror room, the first dress she tried on was as light as mist. Amelia stood still for a long time. The light fell on the large mirror, reflecting the image of a young girl looking at herself with amazement, not because she saw herself as beautiful, but because she saw a version of herself, a version she never thought she could be again, standing straighter, her eyes softer and no longer defined by a bruise. A long, deep breath escaped her chest, and so softly, like a confession meant only for the mirror, I thought, I couldn't survive, but here I am. The words were as light as a breeze, but so quiet that the whole room seemed to stop listening. Ruth touched her shoulder, her eyes sparkling. That's why we choose wedding dresses, not to look pretty for anyone else, but to remind ourselves that we've come this far. It was late afternoon when they emerged from the tailor shop. The sunset had spread a honey-colored glow over the town, making everything warm and soft. Amelia walked slowly, holding the roll of ivory fabric Mrs. Barnes had given her. On the way back, the carriage stopped in front of Cedar Grove Chapel. Reverend Wallace stepped out of the door and saw Amelia, smiling gently. I guess today is the first day you feel worthy of a new life. Amelia bowed her head. Yes. Today is the first day I believe that. Reverend swallowed his emotion. That belief is enough to start a family. By the time the carriage returned to Ellison Ridge, it was getting dark. Thatcher was mending the fence near the gate. When he saw Amelia get out, he just looked at her for a long moment, not because of the dress she was trying on, not because of the roll of fabric in her hand, but because there was something on her face today that he had never seen so clearly before. Faith. Not faith in him, but faith in herself, what he had longed to see most. He asked softly, "How is today?" Amelia hugged the roll of cloth to her chest and nodded slightly. "Better than I thought." Thatcher smiled, a small, rare smile reserved for truly memorable moments. And Amelia suddenly realized since the day she came here he had never made her afraid again. And as the night before the wedding came to a close, Amelia sat by the window of her room at Ellison Ridge, watching the full moon hang over the Iron Willow Valley. The moonlight made the ground glow as if covered with a thin layer of dew. She placed her hand on her chest and realized for the first time where her heart had been most painful, there was now a space for hope. The next morning, Hollow Creek awoke to the small bells of Cedar Grove Chapel, echoing through 2 blocks. Not the usual prayer bells, but the ringing of a wedding bell, not big, not extravagant, but enough to warm the small town's heart. Ruth adjusted Amelia's hair, her hands shaking slightly with emotion. "You look like a ray of sunshine, Amelia." She smiled, the smallest but most genuine smile she had ever given. Eli Carter, with his shirt as neatly pressed as he could be, stood at the door as nervous as if he were about to get married himself. "Miss Amelia," he swallowed, I have been tasked with walking you down the aisle." Amelia watched as the once shy, slinky boy stood tall and tall like a man. For a moment she saw herself again, fearful yet still willing to believe. Eli had grown up with the quiet love of the farm, and now he was the one walking her down the aisle, a beautiful continuation. "I'll do fine," Amelia said softly. And Eli's smile lit up like the sun. The Cedar Grove Church was ablaze with candlelight. The people of Hollow Creek, the blacksmith, the apothecary, the Reeves family, the children from the little school were there, not out of curiosity, but because they wanted to see a once wounded woman emerge stronger into a new life. Thatcher stood before the wooden altar, his hands clasped together. He wore an old but neatly combed suit jacket, his hair unusually neat. But it wasn't his appearance that drew everyone's attention, it was the way he looked toward the church doors. The eyes of someone who never believed life could be given another chance. The eyes of someone who is deeply grateful for that chance. When the prelude music sounded, everyone turned towards the door. Eli stepped in first, his hands shaking but his steps determined. After him, Amelia appeared, not pretentious, not glamorous, but gentle as the first light of dawn after a long winter. The ivory dress Mrs. Barnes had made hugged her slim figure, and the light made her glow from within. Thatcher took a slow breath. He didn't take his eyes off her, not because she was beautiful, but because she was standing straight, walking toward him without the trembling she had before. Eli handed Amelia to Thatcher with a proud nod. "Take care of her. Like you take care of all of us." Thatcher placed his hand on Eli's shoulder, squeezing gently an unspoken promise. Reverend Wallace began the service, his voice steady, warm, with the vibrato of someone who had lived long enough to know loss and grace. Amelia and Thatcher stood facing each other, close but respectful. Today, Reverend Wallace said, we witnessed two people coming together not for perfection but for the courage to heal together. Amelia's eyes stung a little at the word courage. Thatcher's eyes softened at the word healing. When it came to the oath, Thatcher spoke first, his voice slow and deep. I promise not to ask for anything you are not willing to give. I promise to listen more than I speak and to stand by you, never in front pulling or behind pushing. Just where you feel safest. Amelia shivered slightly. Ruth handed her a handkerchief from the front row. It was Amelia's turn. She looked up, her deep brown eyes no longer filled with only pain. I promise to learn to trust little by little. I don't promise to be strong every day. But I promise to try, because you created a place where I can start again. The wind outside the window shook slightly, as if in agreement. Then the ritual comes to the moment everyone knows but still holds their breath waiting for. If anyone objects to this marriage, Reverend Wallace said slowly, please speak up now. The church suddenly fell silent. Just then the church door opened. The sound echoed in the quiet space, making everyone stop. A few people stood up. Ruth gently clenched her handkerchief. Eli took a half step forward as if ready to protect. Thatcher instinctively turned around, standing to cover Amelia. But it wasn't the man they feared who entered. Not Ray Mercer. Not someone with a shadow from the past. It was Mrs. Lucinda Wexler, a widow who lived on the edge of Hollow Creek, famous for her rheumatic feet and for not missing a town wedding in 30 years. She was panting, holding a bouquet of wildflowers, lilies, daisies, lavender growing along the roadside. Sorry, I'm late. Everyone laughed with relief. Some sighed as if a boulder had been lifted. Thatcher also relaxed her shoulders. Mrs. Lucinda stepped forward, placed the bouquet in Amelia's hand and whispered, Daughter, whoever has gone through pain but still wants to love that person deserves the most beautiful bouquet of flowers we have. Amelia was speechless. She hugged the bouquet to her chest, as if embracing the town's blessings. 1. As Reverend Wallace pronounced the two husband and wife, the small bell on the church roof rang out uneven, a little old but strangely warm. Thatcher took Amelia's hand, not tightly, just enough to tell her, from here on we go together. And Amelia smiled, a full smile with no darkness left to hold her back. On the church steps as they stepped out, the afternoon sunlight fell on them, like a welcome from the Iron Willow Valley. And that afternoon, as they walked down the steps of Cedar Grove Church to the ringing of the little bells, Amelia held Thatcher's hand with a trust she had spent years rediscovering. The wedding ended in the honeyed sunlight that fell over the Iron Willow Valley, but the marriage had barely begun the moment the door of the cottage at Ellison Ridge closed behind them. That evening, the Thatcher's house was lit by small oil lamps scattered like warm fires in the prairie darkness. Ruth prepared a simple wedding dinner, toast, baked beans, and flower tea, and then quietly returned to her own house, leaving the house quiet to the two of them. Amelia sat at the dining table, her hands clasped together. Not because of worry, but because of the strange feeling that was spreading through her, a feeling of peace so deep that she didn't know where to place it in a life that had once been filled with darkness. Thatcher poured her a cup of hot tea and pulled up a chair opposite, still keeping a comfortable distance. If you want to leave early tonight, he said in a soft voice, we will do just that. Amelia smiled slightly. Tonight? I don't want to avoid it. Not an invitation. Just an acknowledgement that she had come a long way to be here. Thatcher looked at her for a long time, his eyes full of respect. We will go at a speed that feels safe to you. That statement, like a warm blanket draped over her frozen heart, made Amelia breathe a sigh of relief. Their wedding night began with stories, not haste. They sat by the fire, listening to the crackling of the logs. Thatcher told Amelia about the winter he first came to Ellison Ridge, when the snow was so deep he had to dig a path for the horses step by step. He told it in a light, humorous tone, not trying to make her laugh, but it still made her lips curl. Amelia told him of the few childhood days she remembered her mother singing as she worked in the kitchen, afternoons spent chasing chickens in the backyard before life changed. Her stories were small and simple, but her voice was as soft as a weeping willow. Thatcher listened, never interrupting. They talked about things no one had asked, and no one had ever listened to before. Between those stories were long silences, but not heavy ones. It was the kind of silence that only people who had begun to trust each other could sit in without feeling lonely. As the fire in the hearth died down, Amelia touched Thatcher's arm lightly. It was a small gesture, but it was the first time she had initiated it. Thatcher responded by reaching out with his other hand to take hers, not squeezing, not pulling, just holding it in his warm palm. They both sat like that for a long time. No one said anything. No one rushed. No one tried to do what they thought the other expected. Just two people, each hurt, relearning the language of intimacy without fear. Finally, Thatcher stood up, holding out her hand. "If you want, we can go upstairs. If not, I'll sleep on the living room couch." Amelia looked at him. That choice again told her that tonight wasn't about obligation, but about decision. "I want to go upstairs," she said softly. As they passed through the bedroom door, Amelia paused. Not because she was afraid of him, but because she was afraid of herself. But Thatcher noticed immediately. He stood in the doorway, not moving forward. "Only if you allow it." Amelia nodded slightly. He walked in. The oil lamp warmed the room to a honey color. Amelia sat on the edge of the bed. Thatcher sat beside her, a small distance away as always. She turned slightly. The light fell on his shoulder. A long, thin, deep scar ran from his shoulder blade to the middle of his arm. For some reason, Amelia raised her hand and touched the scar very gently, as if afraid it would hurt. Thatcher started slightly, but did not take his eyes off her. Amelia whispered, "You carry wounds, like me." "We all carry things," Thatcher replied. "But tonight, we don't carry them alone." She placed her hand on his chest, where his heart beat steady and steady like the rhythm of the West. He reached out to touch her cheek, not hastily, not possessively, but as one holding something fragile with absolute respect. They don't start with a burst of passion. They start with a hug. A simple, long, deep hug. A hug that asks for nothing in return, just for two hearts to hear the truth that they still believe in each other. Amelia laid her head on Thatcher's chest. Listening to his heartbeat, she felt the fear that had carved so many bruises into her body, slow down. Thatcher put his arms around her back, holding her like a keepsake he never wanted to break. Their wedding night ended not with hasty promises, not with forceful gestures, but with trusting silence. In that moment, Amelia understood. Intimacy is not about giving your body first, but about giving your trust first. And that belief finally found a place to rest. And after that tender wedding night, Amelia realized that happiness wasn't about the wedding bells or the moment of saying her vows in front of the church. Happiness, in fact, was the morning after, when she woke up and found herself no longer afraid of the light streaming through the window. Amelia and Thatcher's new married life flowed like spring water, slow, clear, gentle, but always moving forward. There were no loud laughs, no dramatic confessions, just the small daily routines that had kept the West alive through the harshest seasons. Amelia learned to ride. Thatcher led her out to the back lawn, where a sorrel mare named Maple waited, her eyes gentle as if she knew something important was about to happen. "Just put your palm on its neck first," Thatcher said calmly. "If you feel secure, it will feel secure too." Amelia did as she was told. She felt the animal's warm breath on her skin, a feeling both foreign and familiar. She had never before been able to touch anything without fear of betrayal. But Maple stood still, accepting her. The first step into the saddle was awkward, but Thatcher did not laugh. He just put his hand on the horse's back to steady her. "Just leave me here," he said. Amelia knew he wasn't just talking about riding. She also learned to cook familiar dishes of the West: spicy bean soup, honey, cornbread, baked potatoes with herb butter. Ruth taught each step carefully, as if teaching a granddaughter she had always wanted. When Amelia dropped a spoon or accidentally added too much salt, Ruth just smiled gently. In this kitchen, no one gets scolded for small mistakes. And each time, Amelia felt a part of her past soften. Thatcher learned something new too. He learned to smile. Once Thatcher Hale was a man of work, of toughness, of hidden pain. But when Amelia entered the house, something changed. He smiled more, not a big smile, but a small smile at the corner of his lips, the kind of smile he only reserved for people he cared about. Eli noticed it first. "Boss seems to frown less than before." Thatcher just shook his head, and Amelia chuckled lightly beside him. Of course, no marriage is all smooth sailing. There are times when they argue, not loudly, but enough to show they are two mature people with real differences. One time, Amelia wanted to try to tidy up the food storage in a more organized way. Thatcher, accustomed to the old way, objected. They talked back and forth, their voices not high but a little stiff. Finally, Amelia sighed, "I just want to help." Thatcher was silent for a long moment and then replied, "I know. I just haven't gotten used to not doing everything alone anymore." That statement dissolved all tension. Amelia stepped gently forward and placed her hand on his arm. "Then, we can learn to do it together, and they really learn a little every day. But love is not tested only in gentle moments." One evening, the wind suddenly changed direction from the mountains. Dark clouds rolled in over the Iron Willow Valley. Ruth ran out onto the porch and looked up at the sky. Big storm. Down in the barn, Bo and Harlan were trying to herd the cattle into safer ground. Thunder boomed the ground, shook slightly. Panicked cows butted against the wooden fence. Thatcher took the lantern and ran down the slope. "Hold the barn door. The pups want to get out," he shouted, to be heard above the wind. Amelia stood on the porch. She saw the chaos in the darkness. The sound of the wind reminded her of the terrible nights in the old house where every sound could lead to violence. But that day fear did not overcome her. Amelia picked up her skirt and rushed down the slope, ignoring Ruth's loud calls from behind. "Amelia, don't go down there, it's dangerous." Thatcher saw her from afar and panicked. "Back off. Let me handle it." But Amelia was already at the barn door, pushing with Harlan as the wind whipped at her face. She gritted her teeth, holding the wooden door shut as the animals rushed out. Mud clung to her wedding dress, sewn only days before by the townswomen. Her hair was wet from the rain. Her arms trembled under the weight. But Amelia did not back down. Not to prove anything. Just because she was no longer the weak woman that someone held in fear. Finally, when Bo finished pulling the chain, Harlan shouted, "Okay." The door slammed shut just as the strongest gust of wind swept through. Thatcher took Amelia's shoulder, his face full of concern. "Are you hurt?" Amelia gasped but shook her head. There was no fear in her eyes, only determination. Thatcher looked at her for a long time, and he understood something he should have known sooner. Amelia is not strong in a loud way. She is strong in the way of an oil lamp, small, light, but never extinguished, no matter how strong the wind. After the storm, everyone gathered in the kitchen, drinking hot tea. Eli sat close to Amelia as if afraid she would disappear. Ruth wrapped a scarf around her shoulders, shaking her head. "You scared us to death." Amelia smiled tiredly. "I just do what needs to be done." Thatcher stood in the doorway, watching the scene with soft, deep eyes. No words of praise escaped his lips. But Amelia understood it was in that silence that the greatest pride lay. In the days after the storm, life returned to its usual rhythm. But a new understanding had emerged between them. Amelia wasn't just protected, she was the protector. Their marriage was not about one person being strong and the other being weak. It was about two people standing side by side, each strong in their own way. And from that stormy night, when Amelia stood in the whirlwind without fear, Thatcher knew that his life was about to move to another shore. A shore where he would no longer walk alone. But he never thought it would come so soon and so gently. That morning began like any other morning at Ellison Ridge. A rooster crowed softly from the backyard, the wind rustling through the spruce trees and the smell of Ruth's cornbread still lingering in the kitchen. Amelia opened the window and breathed in the morning air, feeling something different in her body, not tired but strangely full. She placed her hand on her stomach, her fingers trembling slightly, not from worry but from a premonition as warm as the early winter sun. Thatcher was stacking hay in the yard. When Amelia came out, he looked up, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and smiled as he did every morning. But when he saw her face, the smile slowed. He put down the bundle of grass and walked towards her. "Amelia, are you okay?" She looked at him for a long time, her eyes soft as dew. Then she took his hand, placing his large hand on her belly where life was beating softly like the knock on the door of a miracle. "We are having a baby." A sentence as light as a breath. But it reverberated in Thatcher's heart like thunder on a sunny day. He stood still. Then he knelt, not out of ceremony but because his knees were weak with joy. He pressed his cheek to her belly, his arms wrapping around her as lightly as if she were something sacred. "Really? Yes, I'm sure." Thatcher closed her eyes. A man who had lost his brother in battle, who had lived through a long winter of loneliness, now trembled for a tiny life. "Thank you, Amelia." "Thank you." Amelia stroked his hair, her heart constricting with happiness so deep it made her want to cry, but the tears just flowed silently without a sob. The good news spread like wildfire through Ellison Ridge. Ruth hugged Amelia, her hands shaking more than usual. "Oh, my niece. God bless you." Eli jumped up as if he had just heard that there would be an early autumn fair. I will be a big brother, Amelia laughed, patting his head. I will be the first one to teach him to ride a horse. Bo and Harlan stood by the fence, each saying a short but meaningful sentence. Call us if you need anything. Don't let Amelia do the heavy work anymore. Amelia's heart was filled with something she'd never known before, a community that was happy for her. No judgment, no criticism, no scrutiny. Just sharing a part of that happiness. That evening, Thatcher sat on the porch watching the oil lamp flicker in the wind. Amelia came out wrapped in a thin scarf. What are you thinking? Thatcher intertwined his fingers with hers. I used to think it was too late to change my life. Then you came. And now. He looked at her stomach, still flat, but in his eyes it was the brightest place in the world. I see the future clearer than the night sky. Amelia leaned her head against his shoulder. The wind carried the scent of freshly cut grass, damp earth after a storm. The scent of hope. Thanks for watching. The Donner's in. The Donner's in. A week later, the Hollow Creek postman brought a letter. The paper was old and yellow, the handwriting unfamiliar. Amelia opened the letter in the living room, the candlelight flickering on her cheek. Thatcher was sharpening a knife near the window, but when he saw her silence, he put the knife down and approached. What's the matter? Amelia handed him the letter. It contained a few short lines. Her stepfather had passed away. No one in the family would look for her anymore. The past had closed itself. Amelia did not cry, nor did she tremble. She just took a deep breath, then exhaled as if all the heavy burdens in her heart were finally put down. I think I am truly free. Thatcher put his hand to her cheek, his eyes as soft and deep as the Iron Willow Valley on a windless day. You have always deserved that freedom. No one has the right to take it away from you. Amelia looked out the window where the sun was setting, leaving behind a streak of light, and she realized the joyful news of pregnancy didn't just herald a new life, it also closed the door on a dark past forever. She turned to Thatcher. We are going to be parents. He squeezed her hand gently. I know, and I'm happier than I can say. In that moment, Amelia understood that their journey had gone through 4 seasons, from pain to safety to happiness, then to hope. And the next season is all about love. And from the day Amelia placed her hand on her belly, telling Thatcher that they were going to have a little life, Ellison Ridge felt different, softer, brighter, and more hopeful. But it wasn't until the first winter blanketed Iron Willow Valley that that happiness was fully formed. Snow fell the night before Amelia went into labor, big white flakes falling on the wooden roof like a whisper from nature that something sacred was about to happen. Iron Willow Valley was silent except for the faint sound of wind from the distant mountains. Thatcher lay awake all night, clutching his coffee cup so tightly that the hot water had long since cooled without him even realizing it. He walked in and out sometimes, standing outside the door of the room where Ruth was tending to Amelia, sometimes returning to the kitchen so worried he didn't know what to do with his hands. Eli sat on the steps of the house, clutching the gray cat for comfort. Bo and Harlan stood guard outside the stables in case they needed to ride to the doctor, though the snow made the road to Hollow Creek nearly impassable. Ruth, who had helped many pregnant women in town, wiped the sweat from Amelia's forehead and said in a soft, lulling voice, "Everything will be okay. You are stronger than you think." Amelia held her hand tightly. Through the pain, she could still hear Thatcher's footsteps outside, the pacing back and forth of a man whose heart was in this room. Near midnight, a small cry rang out, soft, thin, but piercing through the cold winds outside. Thatcher froze. Eli jerked his head up. Bo and Harlan stopped working. Ruth opened the door, her gray hair covered in sweat, but her smile was as bright as a lantern in the snowy night. "It's a boy!" For a second, Thatcher couldn't move. Then he stepped in, not in a hurry, but as if afraid to disturb the sacred moment. Amelia lay back on her pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her eyes tired but brighter than all the candles in the house. On her chest was a small bundle of blankets, a red baby, its tiny hands curled into fists. Thatcher knelt beside the bed. He couldn't say anything. He just reached out and touched the blanket, then his son's cheek, a gesture as light as a prayer. "Our son," he whispered. Amelia looked at the two people, the husband who had gone through the pain of loss, and the child who carried the warmth of the future, and smiled slightly, I think. "His name is Jacob Hale." Thatcher closed his eyes as if the name filled his heart. "Jacob," he repeated, his voice trembling slightly. "That's a beautiful name, Amelia." The whole farm was in a festive mood. Eli ran around the snowy field shouting, "I became you. You, Eli." Bo laughed so hard his mustache shook. Harlan took out his bone whistle from the shed which he always kept for special occasions and blew it across the valley, though no one but the cows could hear it. Ruth stood in the doorway, her hands still shaking with emotion. She wiped away her tears. "I have never seen this house so bright." The following days passed in a simple happiness that only those who have suffered can understand. Small lives filled every corner of the house with breathing, moving, and soft crying. Thatcher hardly ever left his child's side. If Amelia fell asleep, he carried Jacob into the next room, sat him in the rocking chair, and sang in a deep voice, "Calm down, son. It's Dad." Amelia looked through the open door, her heart blooming like a field of snow, melting under the spring sun. It was the first time she had seen Thatcher, who had hidden pain behind cold gray eyes so warm. One night Jacob cried violently. Amelia was exhausted but still tried to stand. Thatcher was quicker. He took the baby in his arms, patted its back, his voice deep as the mountain voice in the night. Ruth stopped at the door, stunned, when she heard Thatcher say, "No child in this house will ever know fear." The words were not loud, not eloquent, but they contained both the pain of the past and the promise of the future. His child and the person he loved would never experience what he had witnessed. Ruth raised her hand to her mouth, tears falling silently. Not tears of sadness, but tears of seeing goodness springing up in this harsh land. One morning the snow had stopped falling and Amelia carried Jacob out onto the porch. She wrapped him in a blanket, letting the breeze brush his cheeks. Thatcher stood behind them, wrapping their coats around them. "It looks like you," Amelia said softly. "I hope it's not as stubborn as you," Thatcher replied. She laughed, a full-bodied laugh, no longer the reserved laugh of old. The three of them stood there, the man who thought he was unworthy of family, the woman who thought she was unworthy of love, and the child who came like a blessing of winter. In that moment, Amelia realized the house was no longer just four wooden walls. It had become a home. And that winter, when Jacob's cries strangely warmed the house, Amelia knew her life was entering its fullest chapter. But it would take another year, a year of peace following the rhythm of Iron Willow, for her to truly feel the meaning of the two words loved. A year passed like a gentle wind along the mountains, quiet but leaving its mark on every hillside, every blade of grass. Jacob grew quickly. His green eyes were exactly like Thatcher's, and his smile had the gentle light of Amelia. In the mornings, Thatcher would carry her son on her shoulders and walk out into the fields where the summer grass was turning yellow. Jacob would wave his little arms and giggle when the wind blew, and Thatcher would say, "Look, son, this is where you grew up." The gentlest things in this world all started from that land. Amelia stood on the porch looking at father and son, her smile as gentle as the sun. She had thought of herself as a woman from the shadows, a shadow unworthy of standing in the light of a family. But every day at Ellison Ridge, that light touched her slowly but surely, like the morning sun coming through her window. On Jacob's first anniversary, Ruth baked cornbread and made a pot of fragrant chicken soup. Eli erected a small wooden gate on the farm road and added a handwritten sign, "Happy first year, Jacob." Thatcher looked at the sign and chuckled. "Look, he's officially the master of ceremonies in the house now." Amelia smiled, her eyes shining like the first year spring had returned. "If so, this festival will last for many years." Jacob, as if he understood something, clapped his hands continuously and mumbled "da-da," making Amelia's heart soften like water. In the afternoon, when everyone had returned to their work, Thatcher told Amelia to put on her coat and led her to the hill behind the house, a place that overlooked the entire Iron Willow Valley. The ground was still warm with the summer breeze, the green grass patches were dotted with pale yellow wildflowers. In the distance, a herd of cows was scattered along the stream bank, and the clouds drifted silently as if telling the story of the sky. Thatcher stopped at a large rock. He set Jacob down so he could stand, then turned to Amelia. "There is something I want to give you." He handed her a small wooden box made from the eucalyptus trunk he had cut last year when Jacob was a month old. Amelia opened the box. Inside was a silver necklace, the pendant, a small circlet containing a lock of Jacob's light brown hair wound with a thin gold thread. Amelia put her hand to her mouth, unable to say a word. Thatcher gently touched her hand and said in a deep, slow voice like the heartbeat of heaven and earth, "This is our child's first year in the world. A year of laughter, tears, and learning to be parents. I want you to keep this as a new beginning." She looked at the tiny lock of hair, the purest thing she had ever held in her life, and suddenly remembered that afternoon last year when she had trembled at her own fragility. She came to Iron Willow with a broken heart. She thought she had nothing to give, and now she stood in the middle of a vast valley beside the man who loved her with the most enduring tenderness. Jacob toddled over, wrapping his arms around Amelia's legs. She bent down to pick him up, tears rolling down her cheeks, quiet, not of pain but of gratitude. "You've come a long way, Thatcher." Thatcher put his hand on his wife's shoulder. "And you never have to go alone again." They sat on a rock overlooking the Iron Willow Valley, stretching to the horizon. The space was vast, yet strangely intimate, like the arms of the West embracing those who had the courage to live kindly amid its harshness. The wind blew gently, carrying the scent of thyme and warm earth. Jacob dozed off in Amelia's arms, his breathing steady like the rhythm of peaceful life. Amelia looked down at her child, then at the man beside her. She saw the same girl from a year ago, the one who stepped down from the carriage with fear in her eyes, the one who had never known love but the heavy shadows. That first snowy night seemed like a fragile beginning, but it turned out to be the day she was born again. Thatcher reached out and touched the necklace around her neck. The gesture was light enough not to stop the wind, but enough to make Amelia's heart flutter. "You know," he said, his voice deep and murmuring like autumn through a forest, "I've thought a long time about the first day I met you, and the promise I made then." Amelia turned to him, her eyes sparkling with emotion. "You kept your word." Thatcher did not answer immediately. He looked out into the valley where the sun was slowly setting, leaving streaks of light like a golden blanket over everything. Then he turned back, looked straight at Amelia, and spoke slowly, word by word, "And I will keep that word until the end of my life." A sentence that doesn't need to be loud or climactic. It's strong enough to make older audiences, those who have experienced loss and love, sit silently for a few seconds. Because they understand this. In the Wild West, a man's word was more than just a word. It was honor. It was dependability. It was what made life kind. Amelia rested her head on Thatcher's shoulder. Jacob slept soundly in her arms. And before them, Iron Willow Valley seemed to stand still at that moment, the moment a promise was fulfilled. And so in the midst of the wind and sand, the promise of years past has become a resting place for an entire family. But the West always has other stories about people quietly walking through the darkness to find their own light. If you want, we can open the journey of another heart, where love quietly sprouts amidst the harshest things. The story of Amelia Trent and Thatcher Hale reminds us that healing is not a miracle. It is a journey of kindness, of time, and of people who know how to put their hands on others' pain without causing them more pain. Amelia came to Iron Willow with her faith almost gone. But it was Thatcher's enduring gentleness, the warmth of the Ellison Ridge community, and their quiet love for each other that showed that every person, no matter how broken, still deserves a place to start over. The same is true in our lives today. Perhaps you or someone you know is carrying invisible bruises. We cannot erase them immediately, but we can be like Thatcher. Stand by without imposing, without judging, just saying gently, "You do not have to suffer alone." And sometimes just one act of kindness at the right time can change a person's fate. Thank you for taking the time to stay with us. If you found warmth, comfort, or a little hope in Amelia and Thatcher's journey, please like, share, and subscribe so we can bring you more heart-touching stories like this one. See you again in the next Stories of the Frontier, where the human heart always finds its way back to the light.